Hi, everyone. Welcome to Craft Politics. I'm Joseph Lavoie.
I'm Andrew Percy.
I'm Ollie Mumby-Croft.
That's who? Andrew Percy?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is he?
I'm
He
ill.
looks a bit odd.
Yeah, it
I've
looks,
got,
I
got
mean,
a
more odd than
cold.
usual.
I've got a
Yeah, he's
cold. I'm
grey.
dying.
Yeah.
He's grey, and it's not just his hair this week, it's his face as well.
Too ill to fight back. This is bullying.
Yeah.
I do
I
have a
think it's
black
going
currant
around.
lemsip. I've got a black currant lemsip though, so that makes you feel better.
That is it. Yeah. There's no beer on the show this week. I'm also recovering from something, so I'm sticking with coffee this morning. Holly, are you the only one drinking?
No, I'm not drinking. I've got a really, really healthy green tea. So I'm
Okay. All
feeling
right.
very
Good.
virtuous.
Well,
I
we're all
will
being
not
very,
catch a cold because I'm
very
healthy.
responsible of us this week. Welcome back to the show, everyone. And thank you, Holly, for organizing last week's show in my absence. I'm sure you probably lost 6 or 7 hours trying to get Andrew lined up for that. I'm sure Anthony was very easy to lock in, but it was a great show. And we got lots of feedback from our community. We're starting to get lots of comments on our YouTube channels. You guys had a good discussion around, are we dealing with a credibility crisis in the UK, particularly from the UK Tories? And Anita Perkins has chimed in to say, yes, you've hit it on the nail. You've hit the nail on the head. They, I assume they being politicians, are all just a bunch of self-serving tossers and turncoats. I think those are the Tories who switched the floor to reform.
I love constructive feedback.
It's good to be really clear about what you think. I appreciate that.
You guys also talked about with Anthony what it takes to rebuild the UK Conservatives and where the new MPs might fit into the mix. And so one of our commentators who goes by Mahone257 wrote in 3 days ago, said the Tories are and always have been the party of the rich in a time of rapidly rising wealth inequality, declining living standards, and increasing poverty. The Tories have zero relevance. Zero relevance. Capitalism is in trouble, not just in the UK, but worldwide. The Tories have pushed trickle-down economics, privatization of government assets, Brexit, all caps. I mean, how fucking bad can you get? A political philosophy based on the self has run its course.
If I
I mean,
was door knocking and canvassing, I would put them down. Possible, go back, have another chat.
yeah, probably.
Maybe,
Possible
it's a
forum.
little bit soft, not sure.
I mean, apart from the fact that most of what he wrote was, well, all of what he wrote was absolute and utter tripe. What a load of bollocks, right? I love these anti-capitalists who are like, oh, capitalism's in trouble. It's like, what, the system that has provided us with the best healthcare, the best education, the best quality of life for all, that has raised the living standards of every single socioeconomic group in society, that has meant that we now have a situation in which humans enjoy the best quality of life ever known in the entire existence of humanity on this planet. And these tosspots are like, oh, capitalism's failing. No, capitalism's what's delivering us the health benefits, the services we have. They're just absolute, like, they're loons, these people.
So you got your facts. This person's got his facts. I think we can all agree
No,
to
he hasn't got
disagree.
any facts. What he has is a, like, outdated, like, he's obviously like a socialist or whatever, or a commie or whatever, but like any other system of government, no system on the planet of economic organization, anything has delivered what capitalism has delivered. And that we're letting these people perpetuate these myths to younger people that there was something better than capitalism, that, no, it's the best system we've ever had on the planet because it raises all people. A rising tide raises all boats. They'd rather the gap was this than this, right? They'd rather people were poorer so long as the rich were less rich. As Margaret Thatcher said, whose 100th birthday it was yesterday, they would rather the poor were poorer so long as the rich were less rich. That's what these people are. Absolute loons.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is an insight into the many, many, many times Andrew and I have knocked on people's doors in our former next door constituencies, the closing line of which usually was Andrew saying, and don't vote for me. I don't want you to anyway.
Opposite, I would be embarrassed if you voted for me. I do not want your vote.
Well, here's one that's a little bit more constructive, I think, or at least an attempt to be more constructive. Seamus7747 wrote in, I've been conservative all my life, raised my children to become conservatives, not through indoctrination, but through healthy debate around capitalism versus flawed alternatives. I really hope that the party remains the party in opposition in a more constructive parliament than the kindergarten mudslinging that the House has become. You You need, though, to be realistic and really fight to come second as reform with the never-ceasing work of Starmer. No, I didn't mix that up. Starmer's totalitarian surveillance state policies write blank checks for Farage have already won this fight. Generally, I wish you well and pray that the Conservatives remain on the right side of the House and that the next election is an extinction event for Labour.
Oh,
That's the kind
Hi.
of prayer we appreciate, I think.
Yeah, we do appreciate that one. Yes, but I mean, I think the one thing I always say that you'd often get that you get it when you talk to constituents. I'm sure Holly will attest is, but people would say, "Oh, the problem is you all spend the whole time shouting at each other," and it's actually kind of not true, really, because if you look at most of when Parliament's sitting, I usually say to people, no one ever tunes in to watch the third, the committee stage or the report stage of whatever piece of legislation where people are making thoughtful speeches and kind of agreeing with each other and disagreeing respectfully. Well, that's most of the work of Parliament, right? Instead, people judge it all by Prime Minister's questions, which is half an hour a week, which is the bit where people are like, slinging at mud at each other. But it's not really how most of Parliament is for the rest of the week. But it's also the bit that
We
people
all had
watch. So I never
friends.
understand that. Right. Sorry?
No, you're right. So we all had friends in other parties as well, or even you did.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
most of
I used to say to my non-political friends when I started working on the Hill, and they say, "Oh, what's it like on the Hill? It must be really intense. It must be really annoying to deal with the opposition." I was like, actually, we have a lot more common with the staffers and other parties than I frankly have with you. There's just there is a lot more of a camaraderie around these places, and I think the average Joe would give us any credit for. Okay, well, anyway, guys, keep writing, and we have a lot more comments. We're not going to go through them all. We'll maybe we'll pull some more out, but it seems that people are getting active on our YouTube channel, so do find us on YouTube, subscribe there, and of course, as always, you'll find us wherever you get your podcasts, and you'll find us on Substack if you go to craftpolitics.fm. And so let's get on to it. It is our issue scan. We'll try and keep this one a bit briefer this week. 3 stories to go through. First one is the one that's dominating headlines coming out of this weekend, and that's Hamas releasing all 20 living hostages as Israel frees Palestinian prisoners. Here's a number for you: 38. That's the number of days that these hostages were kept in captivity. So as I said, Hamas has freed the 20 remaining living hostages. There's a big, we say in French, guillemets around that, brackets around that, because it doesn't appear, at least as of reporting that I've seen this morning, that Hamas has lived up to the agreement fully in also returning deceased or dead hostages. They've only turned, at least when I last looked at the news a couple hours ago, they only turned over 4. There's supposed to be more than that. In exchange for the release of the living captives and expected return of the bodies of another, as I say, the 28 that have died, of which only 4 have come through, Israel has freed more than 1,900 Palestinians. And obviously this exchange forms what is seen to be the first part of Donald Trump's plan to end this 2-year conflict. I've been consuming some media out of that market over the last 12 to 24 hours, and there seems to be a lot of optimism, which I think is a natural thing to have when it seems like the war might finally come to an end, this very gruesome war. I'm not so sure I'm as optimistic as a lot of people are on this, and it's very easy for me to say this because within hours of this deal coming through, you see Hamas publicly executing known collaborators in a public square. So no, I think that video still technically has to be validated, but if true, I think is a reminder to us all of what we're dealing with in Gaza through Hamas. And so as quickly as this deal came to be, I think it could also be undone. But I don't know, Andrew, Holly, what do you guys think?
It's almost as if an Islamist terror cult that rapes people and takes hostages can't be trusted.
Almost.
So, it's, I think I hope it leads to something more secure, and that obviously everybody wants lasting peace, and then a final agreement that actually ends this conflict, which obviously goes back a very long way. Everybody obviously hopes that. I mean, the sad thing about it is Gaza is the part of the Palestinian territories that has the most potential, right? Because it's on the sea, it's got an opportunity for port access. It's like everything it could be on the Mediterranean of other successful. And that's what the vision, I suppose, was meant to be after 2005 when Israel left the Gaza Strip. And that's not what came to pass. So we all hope that this board of peace, which may or may not have Tony Blair on, I thought that was interesting, where Trump had, he was going to be on it, and now we don't know whether he is going to be on it.
Yeah, it's completely gone quiet, hasn't it? on
Yeah.
that specific issue.
Yeah, well, I think Trump was asked, and he said, "Oh, he'll see. He hasn't decided yet." But he was, very much. But I mean, I hope so. I'm not overly. We've been here before, right, where there's been a lot of hope and all the rest of it. Part of that whole movement is that they don't want peace. So we shall see. But I think the thing that I've been most irritated and annoyed by is the people who've carried on protesting with even more vigor and vim and like vile kind of anti-Semitic statements and all the rest of it, destroy the Zionist enemy and all this kind of stuff. And there was some stupid lad in England who was like jumping up and down, screaming about putting Zios in the ground and stuff. So this just shows you that a lot of these people who were part of this pro-Palestinian movement have absolutely no interest in peace. It's not really about securing an agreement and a two-state solution, all the things that implement Oslo and all the rest of it. It's that they just hate Israel and they just don't want Jews to have their own state. So I think that's been the most sickening thing, is seeing these people still out protesting, to the point where the government in the UK is saying it is going to take new powers so that it can ban these repetitive marches, which are taking huge amounts of police resources in London and, pissing off Londoners.
Yeah, I think we should all be clear, to at least honest with ourselves, that there's no way that this deal does anything in the short or medium term on the growth of anti-Semitism in the West. Holly, I'm curious though what you think about the role of Trump in all of this. He seems like he was the catalyst for this change. Now, that might be easy to say. Maybe we just got to a point where everyone was ready for some type of peace deal, and the U.S. coming in and applying a bit of pressure on the scales was what it took. But I watched clips of Trump's speech to the Knesset when he spoke to parliamentarians in Israel, and how he's been communicating and framing this deal. I really get the sense that he was personally interested and motivated in securing peace in the region. And it does feel like you take Trump out of the equation, I don't know that we have this agreement. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. I agree. I mean, he has the power and the ability to be the catalyst. And I can't actually think of any other person who actually is in a position to be the catalyst. And when you watch his speech earlier, we've had a lot of press coverage in the UK, and clearly the backdrop to this, everyone understands, is incredibly serious. But to watch the way that he interacted with the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer as he was naming all of those world leaders, and we just had this incredibly awkward, weird exchange where he kind of turned and said, "Well, where's United Kingdom?" And Keir Starmer, who'd been patiently waiting for his go to get named in what looked, remarkably like a school assembly at that point, stepped forward and then found himself sort of with Trump's back turned to him and having to step back again. Like, no other person on the planet has the power to do that, to get all those people in that room, to just have everyone hanging off his every word as Trump did. I think we've got to recognize that and hope that that actually comes to a good outcome.
Yeah, and it's the weird thing about people having to, because he's so unpredictable, it's strange, isn't it? Because, people will almost humiliate themselves to avoid his ire, as it were, which ordinarily you would think this is no way to run anything, but it keeps everybody so much on their toes. You just don't really know where he's going to go with it. So kind of like everyone ends up falling in behind, because otherwise it's just the craziness could be unleashed on you. So it's, I don't think Biden could have done this, because nobody would have taken seriously his threats. For example, if you're on if you're on the Arab side and the Arab nations, which Trump has obviously done a lot of work, and the Trump administration he's been doing a lot of work with them. And, the Abraham Accords were his big thing from his first presidency. So this has been a big focus of his. They've fallen in line because they don't want to be on the ire of Trump. I don't think they would have thought anything would have changed with Biden if they hadn't come along on this. Even with Hamas, even they must have understood that Trump might mean it when he says, well, Israel can then just finish this off if they don't come to the table. And then all the Europeans row in behind, because, again, everybody wants to be at his table, because you don't know where he'll go on tariffs or on other things. Although there's a couple of interesting pieces, though, which I think are worthy of consideration, even if I don't believe them necessarily, is that although I do to a point, is that the recognition issue that, Canada, France, the UK, and all the rest of it, there are people who will say that something I was very strongly against, that, and the fact that Trump didn't really push back as strongly as you might have thought on this. There's suggestions that this was all part of that applied pressure helped bring the Arab states on board, and that this was all part of some coordinated thing. So that is just a strategy, which is that, you go off and do this, that applies pressure here, isolates Israel a little bit, which makes Israel then wholly reliant on the US, which means that then the US can come in and say, well, we're going to set you the line now, this has to end, and this is how, there have been pieces written, and like ministers in the UK have been trying to suggest that all of this is part of a broader joined up strategy. I'm not convinced, but it's interesting that people are at least talking about that. And maybe it's true, but
well, there's going to be, my suspicion is by the time we record next week, this same episode, there's going to be so much that will have developed in there. It's still a very tenuous situation, and so much can change. So we'll have to see. But I'm obviously coming at this. I want to be positive. I want to be hopeful. It's time for some peace in this region and for this war to come to an end. So let's
as well. Or just on that, let's not underestimate what Trump's already achieved in the hostages returning. That is a phenomenal and wonderful achievement. Right now, and we all hope it carries on. But that's fantastic that he's managed to do that.
Yeah, and to get all of them, the living ones, well, that we know of, and we still don't know whether Hamas have told us the truth on the others, or that intelligence is reliable. But the the fact that all 20 came home in a few hours is just actually incredible.
Yeah, it was quite a moment, pretty emotional. Okay, let's move on to Canada next. And it's not one issue, it's not one story, it's two stories for me that I find combined interesting. So the first is, the Globe and Mail has has been briefed, sort of off the record on background, that Ottawa is finalizing a climate competitiveness strategy. So it's due later this month. That apparently is going to downplay near-term emission targets in favor of capturing economic upsides for the global energy transition. It's expected to keep the targets on paper, but shift political focus to net zero 2050 and look at securing Alberta's buy-in in some way, shape, or form. So it may soft pedal the oil and gas emissions cap. And so that's one story. A bit of a change from the Trudeau era focus on climate change issues. So that's one story. We have the Carney government looking at moving away from the zealous approach to climate change that we saw under Trudeau. And we've already seen some of this with some of the changes on EVs. At the same time, the same weekend, we have Canada and India have agreed to a series of steps to strengthen bilateral ties. And this comes 2 years, you'll recall. I think it was a big deal in Canada, but I have a sense it had ripple effects in the Commonwealth. Which is when we had a very big diplomatic row between Canada and India 2 years ago. For our listeners, just to get you quickly caught up, 2 years ago, there was a Canadian citizen in Surrey, where I live, that was killed. Trudeau government came out and effectively blamed the government of India for that assassination. This person was a person of interest to the Indian government because he is seen as a leader, or was seen as a leader, of the Khalistani movement. And so we pretty much went a diplomatic war 2 years ago. And now our foreign minister has met with the Prime Minister of India this weekend. They issued a 1,200-word statement that lays out a quote-unquote new roadmap to restore stability after these 2 years of rupture. So I find this interesting as well. One, because if Canada is going to diversify our trade relationships, I mean, it makes sense to really deepen our links with India because of the economy that it represents. But it's also interesting to me that these two stories coupled start to drive a story of contrast. I find the Carney government, at least Carney himself, is driving more and more contrast and separation between what the Liberal Party was under Trudeau versus what it is now.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the climate targets, I think that's just a global trend we're seeing, right? I mean, you've seen UK ministers doing the same thing of kind of easing away from some of this net zero zealotry. And, there's battles going on in government there between some who are still committed to some of that zealotry and others who are more interested in jobs and growth. And I think that's probably more a reflection of I mean, the personality change certainly helps because Trudeau was so tied to the environmental stuff, right? That maybe it would have been impossible for him to have moved away from that. I think the reality of the situation, I suspect Carney would still be in that position if it wasn't for the fact that the Western economies are basically stagnating.
Mm.
And part of that stagnation is because of things and barriers we've put on ourselves, which don't exist in other parts of the world. And that's where I think you're seeing this pushback against some of it, right? And you've seen it all over the West. So that's maybe just a natural consequence of what's happening because people are realizing that actually, as noble as it may be to try and hit some of these climate targets, the consequence of that is fewer jobs and less economic growth for us at the moment. The great green tech growth that we were supposed to see, I mean, it's happened to a point, right, but it hasn't delivered, record economic growth. So I think this is just a natural consequence of what you're seeing in the rest of the world as well at the moment, rest of the Western world.
Do you think it's politically expedient in the UK, the changes that we're seeing in the language and some of the policy ideas that people are talking about? How much of this is economically expedient Canada-wise, and how much is politically expedient?
I think there have been, certainly on the right in Canada, there's been a feeling that if we're going to tackle the climate change issue, there are so many other markets for which we have to go do that. So why not export more LNG if it's going to get people off coal in some other markets? And our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is minimal compared to other markets. So I don't know what this final strategy is going to look like, but if it is let's go take more sort of quote unquote dirty power off the grid over here by exporting cleaner Canadian energy abroad, and we're not, and we're willing to allow our LNG, our oil and gas to be part of that story, then I think that's a very practical, pragmatic approach to this, and notionally would have also the job creation boom for us as well.
I think directly to your point, Holly, I think it is probably mainly driven by the economics because Canada's had the weakest growth in the G7, and you've seen and it's so tied into the US economy where these things have just started, many of these mandates have just disappeared under Trump. So maybe from a competitive point of view, so I think it's more economic, but there is a political element to it as well, which is very much as Joseph said in his introduction, which is, I think Carney genuinely does want to deal with this kind of Western alienation feeling. And, I mean, isn't he from Edmonton originally? But like the whole Alberta, might want out and the separatist movement. And so it has the impact of potentially dealing with that constitutional political challenge, whilst also really I do think the driving factor has to be the economy, right? Because the economy has been doing so badly, as have most Western economies, but like particularly badly, that I guess, and if everybody else is making similar moves, I suppose you kind of have to follow the herd or be left behind.
Well,
it feels
I
like
wonder.
It just kind of. No, you go, Joseph. Go.
Well, I wondered, do you think this rapprochement with India would occur if Trump hadn't hit us up with the whole tariff issue?
I mean, it's a good question. I mean, it is the world's biggest democracy now, isn't it? And a massively growing economy. So, you kind of have to improve those relations from an economic point of view, but even politically, right? Maybe, because I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, it certainly fits that whole narrative of we're going out and trying to build new markets and all the rest of it. And you can't really do that without engaging one of the biggest emerging markets, perhaps. But I don't know.
On the climate stuff, why does it feel like it's, because I was trying to do some reading around this today, and it feels like there's like very, 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 it's kind of hinted at, it's percolating out a little bit. There doesn't feel like there's proper kind of bold announcements on it. Why is it not kind of a more bolder conversation?
I think he has issues with his caucus. There are still many in his caucus. You think like some of the MPs from Vancouver in particular, who are very tied to this environmental agenda. So I think but you're seeing the same in the UK, right? Where it's like hints of, we're told that ministers have been told to drop net zero from their language. But you still talk about environmental benefits and climate change, but so I suspect it's a painful thing for them to do because it does cause some political pain. And also there are many voters who remain many people who voted for them who are very committed to these things. So maybe it's that they have to just be very gentle about it. But yeah, it's the same.
And maybe there's some value in looking like you think you have to be gentle about it. Don't
Yeah.
kind of rub it in people's faces, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
And I think to that point too, the caucus tensions may be that the appropriate positioning for this strategy is anchored around economic conditions and anchored around finding ways to explain how this will alleviate the cost of living crisis that everyone's dealing with. And I don't know that that's the frame that some of these same caucus members would care. No, the frame that they want is we are going to save the planet. And I think anything that dilutes that, I think, causes some internal sentimental challenges.
Is there any value in terms of public support? So for those who might be disappointed that tariff deals have not been more forthcoming, they haven't got what they wish to get from Prime Minister Carney. Does any of this alleviate any of that as a voter base?
What do you think, Andrew?
I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it's even like that considered. You know what I mean? I think when you're kind of scrapping around in the context of what Trump's doing to the South, I'm not even sure that much of it is really that structured. Does that make sense?
I think so.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Maybe we'll run.
Joseph has no views, so there you are. Then.
I don't. Not on this one.
He's ill as well, so.
Yeah, it's true.
You two just should go home and I'll just kind of finish the podcast on my own. I'll just talk about, I'll get my fossil collection out and show everyone my fossils.
She does have a fossil collection, it's true. Maybe we could do a show and tell next week. You could bring like an interesting fossil and talk to us about it.
Brought you up.
Sorry? You got me?
I brought you, you're a fossil.
Final story we have this week. IMF reporting that the UK is set to have the highest G7 inflation in 2025-2026. The number specifically is an average of 3.4% in 2025. That's up from 3.2% previously, and up from 2.5% as originally forecasted in 2026. In other words, this is the highest in the G7 across both years. The pickup is tied largely to food and hospitality. So labor and tax costs are pushing prices up, even as headline CPI recently clocked in at 3.8%. I find this story interesting because it's not the first time we're seeing widespread reports of there being sort of economic challenges in this market. And as we are heading into what is an autumn budget, I have to assume this causes even additional pressures on this government as it navigates cost of living issues. And you guys are following this much more closely than I am, and you understand that market better than I do. I just don't get the sense that labor has much of a story to tell defensively on cost of living. Do they?
No, I don't think they do. I mean, their first budget was putting up taxes on jobs, putting up taxes on businesses, which of course just forces prices to rise. This is before they introduced their new workers' rights bill, which is going to put even more burdens on employers. I think, look, they can't get a break, can they? I mean, it seems like this Labour government just cannot get a break, because it turns out being in government is quite difficult, and lots of the things that we struggled with, they're struggling with, but because they just believe they're better people, just thought that just being better people, as they saw it, would resolve the issues. But they have, they're not. The problem is we're overspending in most Western countries, right? Spending cannot keep up with where the economy is, where taxpayers are, where receipts are. It can't keep up. Because they're trying to placate their left of their party, they haven't been able to make any savings, or the savings that they intended to make around benefits and welfare. So they're spending more, which means putting up more taxes, which means higher inflation, which means more burden on businesses, which means higher unemployment because fewer jobs. So they're kind of in like a unvirtuous circle, as it were. And if they're going to add more burdens in further bits of legislation which they're planning, then they're not going to get a break.
I agree. It's one of those things that I threw this into the mix because you can really feel it. Andrew and I are both in the UK at the minute. You can feel it when you go shopping. It feels like your money goes less far than it did. It feels like there are less jobs when people are looking for work. It feels like the housing market's struggling, definitely in the south. And we know when it struggles in the south, it will then struggle in the north, and it kind of will spread up the UK and across everybody. It feels like businesses are nervous and like businesses are struggling. When people talk about the budget that we've got coming up, it's not with like any sense of excitement. It's just with trepidation. That's how it feels when you have conversations with people. It's really, really tangible. And inflation is, I mean, you go in a shop and you know roughly what your shopping costs, and you know roughly what butter costs or bacon costs or whatever it is, your bottle of milk costs, and you can tell that things are more expensive, and people are aware of it. People are talking about it, and it feels way more than 3.4% or whatever the latest figure is. So it's
Yeah,
a really tangible problem for people.
I do think people are feeling that. I mean, I am actually back in Canada, but I actually go into shops in the UK and I'm like, oh my God, how can food be this cheap? Because you think food's expensive in the UK, going to a Canadian shop where it is just on a different scale, like buttermilk, bread, it's just
Yes.
crazy. But
I'm always envious at how low the prices are in the UK.
bottle of deodorant, much cheaper. That's why I wear it in the UK and don't bother in Canada. Same with shower gel. I just don't shower here. But but even my parents have been complaining about this, right? And actually, pensioners have been fairly insulated, right, because of the triple lock and things like that. But they were, when I last saw them, were bemoaning how everything's more expensive, and and the whole squeezed middle. It's like kind of young families who have reasonable incomes who are like unable to afford, what they used to, and it just it is noticeable. And they kind of like, they spent so much time in opposition promoting these easy solutions to the Tories cost of living crisis, and then it turns out they've come into power and they've managed to put unemployment up, put inflation up, have economic growth downgraded from even where it was under the last government. So they're kind of, they're in this impossible position because they can't make the economic choices that are required to address some of this because of the weakened position that Keir Starmer's in and the problem they have with the left. And that's actually where I thought it was quite interesting. We didn't talk really about this, but when we did the Tory party conference last week, it was just before Kemi, the Tory leader, had made her speech. And I have to say, she did a pretty okay job of it. And what was interesting was she went pretty hard on this "we'll abolish stamp duty." Now, I mean, the fact it got written up as if the Tories are, anywhere close to power to be in a position to do that, right? I mean, they're just not. But I thought that was quite interesting because it was actually having somebody in politics talking again about tax cuts and about putting money back into people's pockets, and also talking about shrinking the state and making the necessary cuts. And I thought it was kind of like, the Tories are back on an agenda which offers them some sure footing, and there is a constituency for that, of people who see that with the government is spending too much and see that the tax burden has got too high, and that government taxes are now getting in the way of people being able to do basic things like buy a house, or an employer employ somebody new. So I just thought that was interesting. I thought that was I thought she came out of that conference. I don't know whether it'll make any difference overall, but I did think she came out of it kind of with a conservative message that was traditionally conservative, and that's actually a bit distinct from even reform. May chime at the moment where people feel that taxes and costs are really expensive, and that you're paying all this tax but you're not getting better services. So I just thought, anyway, it's an interesting position for the Tories to have put themselves in. I think a sensible one as well.
Yeah.
I think she did do a decent job of that. She really did. It was absolutely good. But it's interesting what you say about your mum and dad, because I think particularly like the older generations who've been through like a few of these cycles economically, there's like this national consciousness and their intuition kicks in. You're taking all of this information in. And a couple of people said it just feels like the 70s. They're just these alarm bells start to go off for people because they've been through these cycles. And people who are older like you, Andrew, who remember the 70s, it just starts to kick in, and you just start to feel that concern. And it's exactly this kind of thing, like the prices at the checkout when you go shopping, that brings up to the front of people's minds.
The prices, the fact there's strikes, the strikes are like, they haven't resolved any of the strikes. They're, giving unions more power and potentially so even more disruption. and nothing seems to work. You seem to be paying huge amounts of money for services that seem to be declining. And the economy is stagnating, very, very much 70s vibes, right? And, the government just spending unsustainably and borrowing lots of money in the process.
I think it's the compounding element that is going to make this a political problem for Labor for a long time. And I think it's smart for Kevin to double down on it, because when I read out those numbers, I don't know that if you spoke to the average person and told them actually inflation kind of leveled out for a little bit post-pandemic, came down, and now it's climbing back up. I don't know that many people would feel like it ever came down, right?
Yeah.
I think they'd say no, it got crazy during the pandemic, and it's just either stayed up there or it's been slowly climbing ever since, and we've had no relief in the better part of 5 years on this stuff.
Well, yeah, because even if inflation comes down, it still means your prices are going up. Doesn't mean it's like,
yeah, correct. Yeah,
this is
that's
like.
right.
I think a lot of people think, oh, if we get inflation down, my prices will come down. No, they'll just keep going up by less. But that big jump that occurred in the pandemic, was never reversed.
Yeah. And so I think it's a very difficult economic and political problem for any government to be dealing with right now. So I think it's going to be a big challenge for Labor.
And also,
Okay.
It doesn't really matter if it's true, right?
Yeah.
It's just the fact people say it and it becomes a thing. Is just everybody saying it. So then whether or not they're really feeling it doesn't really matter. You're taking the political pain of people saying everything's got more expensive and it's all awful. But you can't really undo that with facts because it's just a sentiment, right?
Yeah. Let's move on to our last segment of the day, our lipstick on a gerbil, where we take a look at a political communicator trying to explain a gerbil a problem away. Why don't you, Holly, you'd found this one for us this week. Why don't you give us the context of what we're about to watch?
Yeah, sure. So Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met with US President Donald Trump in Washington earlier this week. They're discussing trade and tariffs and a lot of the stuff that was so important to the voters who elected Prime Minister Carney. Melanie Joly is the industry minister. She was there for the visit, part of some of those conversations. And the discussion after is, she's into the press and talking about essentially that they don't have the deal yet. And she's attempting to explain that.
And this is in the context, of course, of the whole elbows up. Carney's the great negotiator, the central banker. He's going to go and negotiate Trump, and it's all very strong language and all the rest of it.
Yes, and it is.
And the amazing moment in question period when Pierre Poilievre said they haven't seen his elbows since the election, which just sounded like full northerner, like UK northerner would have been proud of that comment. I thought it was very strong.
And last bit of context is it was Carney's second visit to the White House since being elected prime minister. Okay, here we go.
Details of the negotiations. But do I take from what you just said and what we heard from the Prime Minister that there won't be any deal on autos anytime soon? Howard Lutnick was pretty much explicit that Canada, he said, should come second to the United States, that maybe they'll continue buying parts, but nothing really beyond that. Is that your understanding? And if so, how consequential is that?
Well, I think the only person in the U.S. administration that decides is the President himself. So you saw a positive meeting this week between the Prime Minister and the President. The tone was respectful, and obviously the President directed his team to work with our team to make sure ultimately that we would land on a deal. And the challenge that the Prime Minister of Canada has, and any leaders in the world have, is to attract the attention, to get the attention from the president, who has many other things to deal with, including a ceasefire in the Middle East. So that's what Prime Minister Carney was able to do. Meanwhile, of course, I, like you, heard the comments from the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and my message to Canadians, particularly Canadians and workers working in the auto sector, is we will fight for every single job.
All right, good. So reminder, our rating system, 3 coats of lipstick is incredible comms work. 2 coats, solid effort with some visible issues. 1 coat is barely concealing the problem, and no lipstick. The gerbil is fully visible. Who wants to go first this week?
I give it a 1.5 because she's like, it's a strong performance. She looks really in control. She's quite comfortable. She's communicating, but it just is starting. I'm not Canadian, I don't live in Canada, but this feels very, very slow to me. I mean, how many times can you say, we're having conversations, we're all getting around the table, everyone's job's important? Like, this stuff starts to wear thin. And for me, that's kind of where that sounds like that's at. But I'd be interested to hear from your two's point of view, how will the public perceive that?
I think the thing I found most amusing was if this was about attracting his attention. It's like, well, I hope so, because it was a set-up meeting. I hope in the meeting he got his attention, but it's a bit like, I mean, basically, she just said, we don't know, we've no idea, and does anybody, right? So it was a lot of words to basically say, we have no idea, and we'll just keep trying to get his attention and hope he, showers us with some fealty, or, it's just, it wasn't a bad job, but it's just.
What are you giving it? 2?
Well, 1.5 as well. So.
I'm prepared to go as high as 2.
She didn't embarrass herself. She didn't do anything. I think just what can you say? You're trying
There's
to say
very little, exactly. Like, what can you actually say? The part that I thought, the reason why I'm giving it edging on 2 is I thought she did a good job, even if it comes at the risk of pissing off the envoy that Trump has appointed to be the spokesperson on these issues. And to be fair, the remarks that were commented on were done in a private, in a private Chatham House style event. And I am told from the people who participated in that event that it's being reported a little bit off, that the reporting doesn't capture his tone. His tone was much more in the vein of a friend trying to just be very honest with his friends about the things that are going to be negotiable versus non-negotiable. And it's like, guys, hey, Canada, just move the fuck on from this auto thing. Like, we're done. Let's figure out the other stuff we can sort out together. So her coming out and suggesting that only Trump is the one who's making these decisions, I think is right in the sense of the only way to appeal to Trump is to appeal to his ego, to the extent that he would even pay attention to anything that she's saying on Canadian political broadcasts. But you need all the friends you can get in this administration, and so I don't know that diminishing his input is worth at any point. And the last thing I'll say on this is proof that Trump isn't always a one-man show. When you look at his comments at the Knesset this week on the peace deal in Gaza, he had a huge chunk of his remarks was thanking specific individuals who had roles to play on this. Yes, he is an egomaniac without a doubt, but when he's doing big stuff, he does rely on a cabinet of advisors around him, and he's prepared to give them credits. We should make friends everywhere we can, but also let's manage expectations. I don't think Carney can do a third trip to the White House without something in return in the next 6 months.
Maybe he's not going then.
Yeah. It's just
all those air miles.
It's all expectations management, right? All right. Percy and I have powered through, despite Percy looking like death and mine not feeling like $1 million. Holly, thanks so much for putting up with us.
Thank you very much.
And we'll be back later in the week with an interview with my friend Dan Robertson, who has a really interesting set of policy ideas for how to make potentially the right in Canada more competitive electorally. So stay tuned. We'll be back later in the week with that in your feed. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye.